hardest grief isn't always losing what you had. Sometimes it's losing what you thought would happen: the marriage, the career, the timeline, the future you were certain that would unfold. And then one day you realized life is not going the way you planned. That's what I want to talk about today. Welcome to Divine Living with Purpose. I'm Alicia, and this is episode 4 of our series, The God Who Sees Me. Today we're going to be talking about grief and the unmet expectations, the disappointment that comes when life unfolds differently than you'd imagine, when plans unravel, when timelines shift, when doors close, when the future you pictured begins to look very different from the future that you're currently living. Some losses aren't about what happened, they're about what didn't happen. The opportunity, the relationship, the dream, the version of life that you believe was just ahead of you. And one of the hardest parts about unexpected seasons is learning how to trust God while grieving what never came to be. And I always go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and 1, where it says, "To everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under heaven." One of the hardest parts of maturity is accepting that life moves in seasons, not permanent moments, but seasons. We love the seasons that feel joyful. We love the seasons where prayers are answered quickly, doors are opening, relationships are thriving, purpose feels clear. But scripture also reminds us that there's a time to mourn, there's a time to heal, there's a time to let go, there's a time to rebuild, a time to weep, and a time to just be still. And many of us struggle because we're trying to make one season behave like another. We're trying to rush healing. We're trying to avoid the grief that we actually need to walk and live through. We're trying to force clarity. We're trying to control transitions that were never fully ours to control in the first place. Every season carries its own assignment. Some seasons, they stretch you. Some seasons, they humble you. Some seasons expose the things you didn't know were still living inside of you. Some seasons isolate you. Some completely redefine who you are. Not every season is designed for visibility. Some seasons are designed for development. The world often celebrates platforms, but God does his best work in some of the most private places. A season can feel uncomfortable and still be ordained. A season can feel uncertain and still have purpose. A season can feel painful and still be producing something inside of you. The grieving seasons, the lonely seasons, the unexpected seasons, the waiting seasons, the seasons that reveal things like what you're trusting, what you're holding on to, what are you attaching your identity to? What is it that God may be asking you to release? These are all very important things that come along with those seasons. But what I want you to know is what may feel like disruption may actually be preparation. So let's talk about grieving some of these expectations. I think people underestimate how deeply unmet expectations can affect us emotionally, because grief is not always connected to death. Sometimes we grieve missed opportunities, relationships that change, unanswered prayers, delayed promises, lost time, or the version of life that we thought we would have already had by now. But life just keeps moving while you're still processing that disappointment. People still expect you to function. They still expect for you to move forward and stay hopeful. Meanwhile, internally, you're trying to make peace with the fact that life looks very different from the way that you imagined it. And that's real grief. Not the grief of what was, but the grief of what you thought it would be. So a little personal reflection, one of the hardest things I've had to process emotionally in this season was realizing that the career path that I thought I would be on forever was no longer where God wanted me to stay. So for a while, everything looked great. The trajectory was trending upward. It looked promising. Doors were opening. Opportunities was expanding. I was in the right networks. And from the outside, it looked like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But then something shifted, not around me, but inside of me. And I remember waking up one night, just being so restless, and it was just a heaviness that I couldn't explain. And then suddenly the profession that I was in felt heavy, uncomfortable, uneasy in my spirit. Not fear, not confusion, but a knowing, a quiet, undeniable knowing. It was God telling me that it was time for me to leave that season of service and to serve in a different way and in a different capacity. And that wasn't what I wanted. I had plans, I had expectations, I had imagined a completely different outcome and a completely different future. But I want you to know that the greatest disappointment is not always a loss. Sometimes it's realizing that God is asking you to release something that you still love, something you invested your time and your emotions into, something that you sacrificed for with resources and care and compromise and patience, something that you've attached part of your identity to. God has a way of making certain spaces so uncomfortable when He's trying to move you into a different direction, not out of punishment, but out of purpose. This discomfort becomes a signal. The uneasiness becomes an invitation. The restlessness becomes redirection. And what amazed me the most was what happened after I truly surrendered. The moment I made the decision out of obedience, the peace just showed up. Not answers, not clarity, just peace. The kind of peace that doesn't even make sense yet. The kind of peace that arrives well and long before the details do. And that's when I understood that obedience will often give you peace before it gives you clarity. Let me say that again. Obedience will often give you peace before it gives you clarity. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. Maybe you're holding on to a season that God has already been asking you to release. Maybe you're holding on to a version of life that no longer fits who you're becoming. Holding on to a plan while God is trying to reveal your purpose. So what do we do when God redirects your life? Well, Proverbs 19:21 says, many are plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Surrender sounds beautiful until life requires it. It's beautiful when it's someone else's testimony. It's much harder when it's yours. It's much harder when the relationship ends and the opportunities change and the timeline shift and the dream looks different and the future looks uncertain. That's when the surrender becomes real. We see the closed door, but God sees protection. We see the interruption, but God sees invitation. We see the delay, but God sees the preparation. We see the ending when God sees what He's beginning. And maybe the very thing that you're grieving today is the thing God is using to guide you towards your next season. I want you to know that disappointment is not abandonment. And maybe this is what someone listening today needs to hear. Disappointment is not proof that God abandoned you. Delayed does not mean denied. Unexpected does not mean purposeless. And closed doors does not mean God stopped being present in your life. Some of you are grieving versions of life that no longer exist. And that grief is real. We're not going to downplay it. That grief is really, really real. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt. You don't have to rush through it. You don't have to spiritualize it away. But there is a time to mourn. There is a time to grieve. There's a time to process. There's a time to release. And there's a time to begin again. The life God is building may not look like the life that you planned, but different does not automatically mean worse. Sometimes different may be the very place where purpose is waiting for you. So I always hit you with a transformational turning point. And maybe part of healing is accepting this. You cannot fully embrace the season God is leading you into while remaining emotionally attached to the version of life you're refusing to release. Growth and grief can often arrive in the same place together. We celebrate the growth, yet we rarely talk about the grief that comes with it. The grief of letting go, the grief of changing, the grief of surrendering expectations, the grief of becoming someone new. Some of you are trying to move forward externally while you're still holding on to yesterday internally. Healing begins when you stop asking, why didn't my plan work? And start asking, God, what are you trying to show me in this season? Because the better question isn't, why did this happen? It's, who am I becoming through it? And I have some reflection questions for you. What version of life are you still grieving right now? What expectation are you still holding on to? What season has God been asking you to release? And have you allowed disappointment to make you resistant to where God may be leading you next? I want you to remember this today. Even when life changes unexpectedly, God is still intentional. God is still present. He's still guiding. He's still working. And just because the season looks different than what you imagine does not mean that your story has lost purpose. Some seasons redefine you. Some seasons humble you. Some seasons redirect you. Some seasons prepare you. But none of them are beyond God's ability to use it for your growth, your healing, and your becoming. And even here, in the disappointment, in the uncertainty, in the unexpected, the God who sees you is still walking with you through every unexpected turn. This is Alicia from Divine Living with Purpose, and I'll meet you right there next time.